Welcome to Tea and Tales. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight, to this quiet corner where stories and warmth live together. If you've had a long day, or perhaps a busy one filled with too many tasks and too many thoughts, I hope you'll let those cares drift away now. If your evening has been quiet and you're simply looking for comfort before sleep, know that you're in exactly the right place. Some of you might be nestled in bed already, pillows just right, blankets wrapped around you like a gentle embrace. Others might still be settling in, finding that perfect position where your body feels supported and safe. Whatever your state of mind tonight, whatever brought you here, I want you to know that there's nothing you need to do but listen and let yourself relax. Tonight, we're going to spend time with a very special kitten, one who has stumbled upon something quite magical. It's a story about wonder and discovery, about finding courage in the quiet moments, and about learning that adventure can exist right alongside the safety and comfort of home. The kitten in our story is small and curious, gentle and kind. And over the course of this evening, we'll watch as this little one experiences something that will change how they see their world. But for now, let's take a deep breath together. Feel your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow naturally, at whatever pace feels right for you. We're about to drift into a beautiful dream. Somewhere in a quiet neighborhood, nestled between tall buildings that glow softly in the evening light, there lived a small kitten. The kitten's name was Mina, though there weren't many who called her by that name. She was the kind of kitten that people often overlooked, not because she wasn't special, but because she was so perfectly content in her own small world that she didn't demand attention. Her fur was a soft grey colour, like the sky just before a storm, and her eyes were a pale green that seemed to hold infinite patience and curiosity. Mina had lived in this neighbourhood for nearly 2 years now, and she knew every corner, every alley, every warm spot where the afternoon sun lingered longest. She knew the baker on the corner who sometimes left scraps of fish for her, and the old woman in the apartment on the 3rd floor, who always kept her window cracked open so Mina could slip inside and nap on the armchair by the radiator. The neighbourhood was her kingdom, and she ruled it with a quiet, unassuming presence. Mina's mornings always began the same way. She would wake in whatever shelter she'd chosen the night before. Sometimes it was the bakery window, sometimes a warm cardboard box behind the grocery store, sometimes a fire escape landing where the metal was still warm from the previous day's sun. Her ears would perk up at the first sounds of the city stirring to life, the rumble of buses beginning their routes, the metallic sound of gates being raised on storefronts, the voice of the street sweeper calling out greetings to people he knew. She would stretch her small body, extending her front paws far out in front of her, feeling the pleasant pull in her muscles as she woke. Then she would begin her day, but Mina was not always alone in her wanderings. There were other cats in the neighbourhood, a sleek Siamese named Pearl, who lived in the penthouse and rarely descended to street level, and a large orange tabby named Chance, who spent most of his time hunting in the park 2 blocks away. Mina sometimes saw them at dusk, crossing paths on the fire escapes and rooftops, exchanging the minimal acknowledgement that cats offer one another. Yet for the most part, Mina preferred her solitude. She found a deep satisfaction in the simple rhythms of her days, waking to the sound of traffic, stretching in the morning light, exploring the familiar streets as the world around her stirred to life. During the day, Mina would perch in various windows and doorways, watching the humans go about their business. She observed them with the kind of patient attention that only cats can manage. She watched them hurry to work with their coffee cups and their worried expressions, saw them return in the evenings looking tired and relieved, noticed how some of them smiled at her and others simply passed by without seeing. There was something deeply comforting about this role she played in the neighbourhood. Silent observer, quiet witness to the small dramas of human life. The city to Mina felt like a warm blanket pulled up over her shoulders. The sounds were familiar and lulling. The distant wail of sirens, the rumble of buses, the chatter of people on sidewalks. Even the exhaust and dust that Rob could see from the streets held a kind of pleasant warmth. There was the woman in the corner apartment who always seemed to be crying softly as she looked out her window, though Mina could never understand why. There was the young man 2 buildings over who played his guitar in the afternoons, the same melancholy songs over and over again. There were the children who lived on the 2nd floor and who sometimes threw breadcrumbs out their window, which Mina would eat gratefully, even though she preferred the baker's fish scraps. There was the old couple on the 4th floor who seemed to spend entire days just sitting together, holding hands, watching the street below. All of these people were part of Mina's world, not because she spoke to them or they spoke to her, but because she witnessed them, remembered them, understood somehow that she was connected to all of them through the simple act of sharing this neighborhood. As evening fell each day, the city transformed. The sun would sink behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the streets, and then the lights would begin to emerge. First, the street lamps would flicker on, casting pools of golden light at regular intervals along every block. Then the windows would start to glow, apartment by apartment, building by building, until the entire neighborhood seemed to be filled with warm light. These moments, as the city transitioned from day to night, were Mina's favorite times. Everything felt quieter then, more intimate. The pace of the human world seemed to slow. She would find a perch on a lower rooftop or a fire escape and simply watch the city transform before her eyes. The lights in the windows particularly fascinated her. Behind each one was a small world, a room filled with people and furniture and the warm glow of evening activity. She could see them moving about, sometimes silhouetted against the light, sometimes clearly visible as they walked past a window. Some apartments had curtains that were left open, and Mina could see glimpses of lives being lived. People cooking dinner, children playing, families gathered around tables. Other windows remained dark, either empty or hidden behind heavy drapes. But it was the lit windows that called to Mina's imagination. Each one felt like a small story, a moment of belonging and safety that she could witness from her vantage point outside, looking in. Mina would spend hours in these twilight moments, watching the city wake up with light. She noticed that the rhythm of the lights was consistent and comforting. By 6 o'clock, most of the apartments would be glowing. By 7, the streets would be fully illuminated, the golden street lamps creating their familiar pools of light. By 8, the city would have settled into its evening pattern, and Mina would feel that special sense of contentment that came from knowing that everyone was home, everyone was safe, everyone was in their place. Sometimes she wondered what it would be like to be inside one of those lit windows, to be part of one of those small worlds of light and warmth and family. But mostly she was content to be where she was, outside and looking in. There was something peaceful about witnessing beauty from a distance, about feeling connected to all these people and all these lives without having to ask for anything from them, or give anything back. It was enough to know they were there, to know that the lights would come on at the same times every evening, to know that the city had patterns and rhythms that she was part of, even if she remained forever on the outside. On this particular evening, the evening when everything would change for Mina, the sky had turned a deep shade of blue, that special blue that exists only in the time between sunset and true darkness. The stars hadn't yet begun to appear, but the light had that quality of softness that comes only during twilight. Mina had spent most of her day in her favorite spot, a nook formed by the corner of 2 buildings where the brick was warm from the day's sun. She had watched the shadows lengthen across the pavement, had felt the temperature drop slightly as the sun moved lower in the sky, had listened to the gradual increase in street noise as people returned home from work. She had observed the lights beginning to emerge in windows, one by one, painting the buildings in shades of golden warmth. It was a familiar pattern, one that had repeated every evening for the nearly 2 years that Mina had lived in this neighborhood. But on this evening, something was calling to her, some small voice in her consciousness that suggested she venture beyond her usual routes. As evening approached, she began her usual slow prowl through the neighborhood, letting her paws carry her through the familiar streets that had become second nature to her. But something felt different tonight, something subtle in the air itself. The smell on the breeze was not the usual smell of cooking and car exhaust and concrete. There was something else mixed in, something that made her slow her pace and lift her nose to catch the scent more clearly. It was on this evening that Mina took a turn she rarely took, walking down an alley that usually held nothing of interest, just dumpsters and old brick and the smell of things rotting slowly in the dark. She had walked down this alley before, many times, and found nothing but disappointment. But something on this particular evening seemed different. There was a new smell in the air, something that wasn't quite floral but carried that same sense of gentle beauty. It was almost like cinnamon, almost like honey, almost like the memory of something warm and comforting. It was almost like the smell of home, though Mina had never really had a home in the way other animals did. The smell pulled at her, drawing her deeper into the alley than she usually ventured. Her curiosity, which lay dormant most days beneath her calm exterior, began to stir, waking up from its long sleep, like a living thing stretching in the sunlight. The alley opened up slightly, where an old wooden door had fallen off its hinges, creating an opening into what looked like an abandoned building. The smell was stronger here, and it seemed to be coming from inside, wafting out into the cooling evening air. Mina paused at the threshold, her ears alert, listening for any sounds that might indicate danger. She could hear the hum of the city beyond the building, the distant sound of traffic, but nothing within the space itself. There was only silence, a deep and peaceful silence that somehow felt welcoming rather than threatening. It was the kind of silence that suggested safety, that promised no sudden movements or loud noises. She stepped through the broken doorway and found herself in what had once been a storage room of some kind. The walls were lined with empty shelves and old boxes, some collapsed, some still standing. The floor was concrete, dusty and cold beneath her paws. Dim light filtered in through a high window, just enough to see, but not enough to see everything clearly. And then, in the corner of the room, partially hidden by a tumbled stack of boxes, she could see something that made her stop in her tracks. Her whiskers twitched, her ears perked forward. She had found something. It was a carpet. Not an ordinary carpet, but something unlike anything Mina had ever seen before. It appeared to be quite old, with colours that had faded, but still seemed to hold some kind of luminescence in the growing darkness. Purples and golds and deep blues swirled across its surface in patterns that seemed almost to shift and move when she looked at them. The edges were frayed and worn, the fabric thin in places where it had been walked on or rubbed against something rough. But it was the way the carpet seemed to shimmer that captured Mina's complete attention. Even in the dim light of the storage room, it seemed to glow with a soft, inner light, as if it contained some of the warmth of the city lights that were just beginning to twinkle to life outside. It was almost as if the carpet was breathing, as if it was alive in some way that Mina couldn't quite comprehend, but that she could feel in her bones. The carpet was calling to her in a way she couldn't explain. It wasn't a sound, not exactly, but something more like an invitation, a gentle pull that made her want to move closer. It was like the smell of the baker's fish, which drew her across the neighborhood to that corner store. It was like the warmth of the radiator on cold nights, which pulled her toward the old woman's apartment. But this pull was stronger, more insistent, more demanding. She approached it slowly, one careful paw in front of another, the way she approached any unknown thing. Her heart was beating a little faster now, she noticed. Her breath was coming a little quicker. She was nervous, yes, but also excited in a way that was entirely new to her. As she got closer, She could smell it more clearly. That cinnamon and honey scent, mixed now with something else. Something like old libraries and distant lands. She had never been to a library, had never travelled to distant lands, but she imagined that if she ever did, they would smell like this. The carpet smelled like possibility. It smelled like dreams. It smelled like the most magical thing that had ever existed in her small grey world. When Mina finally reached the carpet and touched it with her small grey paw, she felt a warmth spread through her that wasn't like the warmth of the sun or the warmth of a radiator. It was a different kind of warmth, one that seemed to come from inside the carpet itself and flow directly into her through her paw. She could feel it travelling up her leg, spreading through her entire body like spilled honey, like something alive that was reaching out to enfold her. She pulled her paw back, startled, but the warmth remained, lingering on her fur like a memory. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped onto the carpet. Her claws caught slightly in the worn fabric, and she could feel the texture of it beneath her pads, soft and worn and comforting, like touching something that had been loved for many, many years. The carpet seemed to welcome her weight, seemed to shift slightly to accommodate her body. She settled onto the carpet, curling up in the center of it, her tail wrapping around her body in the way that cats do when they're trying to make themselves as small and comfortable as possible. The warmth of the carpet enveloped her, surrounding her completely. This was a dangerous thing to do, she knew on some level. Kittens should be cautious about strange objects in strange places, but the carpet felt so safe, so inviting, so perfectly suited to her small body that she found it impossible to be afraid. The fear that would normally accompany such a discovery simply wasn't there. Instead, there was only a sense of rightness, of having found something that had been meant for her all along. As she lay there, she realized that she could no longer smell the damp and dusty scent of the storage room. The smell of rust and concrete and old things had faded completely. Instead, she could smell night-blooming flowers, jasmine and night-blooming cereus and moonflowers, and fresh air like the air that came after a summer rain. There was also something else mixed in, something that seemed almost like magic itself, like incense or starlight, or the memory of a place that was infinitely distant and infinitely beautiful. The city lights outside were growing brighter now as true darkness descended. Through the broken doorway and the small window, high up on the wall, Mina could see them, all those windows in all those buildings, each one glowing with warm light. They seemed to be calling to her, or perhaps she was calling to them. The sight of the city at night had always filled her with a sense of wonder, a sense that she was part of something larger and more beautiful than her small kitten life suggested. But now, lying on this strange and wonderful carpet, something felt different. Something felt like it was about to change. She could feel it in the air itself, in the way the carpet seemed to hum beneath her, in the way her heart was beating with anticipation. Mina drifted on the edge of sleep for a while, warm and comfortable, listening to the sounds of the city settling into evening. The street noise outside seemed muted and far away. Instead of the harsh honking of car horns and the aggressive rumble of buses, she heard only the gentle sounds of footsteps, of distant conversations, of wind moving through the neighborhood. There was also a new sound, she realized, a soft humming that seemed to be coming from the carpet itself. It was a sound like distant music, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, like the sound of time itself moving slowly forward. Even these sounds seemed to fade as the night deepened, until she existed in a state of almost perfect silence and stillness, broken only by the soft humming of the magic beneath her. Then, very gradually, she began to notice something strange. The carpet beneath her seemed to be shifting slightly, growing even warmer. It wasn't an uncomfortable heat. but rather the kind of gentle warmth that makes you want to settle in more deeply and let yourself be held by it. It was like being wrapped in a blanket that had been sitting in the sun all day. It was like nestling against something alive and breathing. She opened her eyes, lifting her head from where she'd been resting it on her paws. The interior of the storage room seemed to be glowing now, illuminated by a soft light that was coming from the carpet itself. Not a harsh light, but something gentle and welcoming, like candlelight, or the last light of sunset reflected on water. The purples and golds and blues were definitely moving now, flowing across the fabric like water, like clouds, like something alive and breathing. The patterns shifted and swirled, and Mina watched them with fascination, seeing faces in the patterns, seeing mountains and rivers and cities, seeing 1,000 different stories written in the tapestry. Mina's heart, which had been beating slowly and calmly, began to beat a little faster. But it wasn't from fear. It was from excitement, from anticipation, from the sense that something wonderful was about to happen. She had spent so long watching her city from below, from the ground level and the lower rooftops, that she had learned not to expect anything more than what she could see. She had made peace with the idea that she would always be an observer, always be on the outside looking in. But something in this moment, something in the presence of this magical carpet, made her feel like the boundaries of her small world were about to expand, like she was about to step through a door that she had never even known existed. The carpet began to rise. It was so subtle at first that Mina almost didn't notice it. The dust on the floor around the carpet's edges seemed to shift slightly, swirling upward as if caught by an invisible breeze. But the carpet itself and everything on it remained perfectly still and perfectly safe. Mina could feel herself being lifted, but there was no jostling, no sensation of falling or instability. It was like being carried by an invisible parent, held safely and securely. Mina remained curled in the center of the carpet as it lifted higher and higher, until the broken doorway was now below her instead of ahead of her. The alley fell away, shrinking to a dark line on the street below. The storage room became a small box of darkness and brick, no larger than her paw. And suddenly, Mina found herself suspended in the air above her neighborhood, looking down at the city that had been her entire world. The fear that might have come with such a discovery never arrived. Instead, a profound sense of peace and rightness filled her, filling her entire being, replacing any doubt or hesitation with absolute certainty. This was not dangerous. This was exactly what was supposed to happen. This was her destiny, she realized with a clarity that was almost shocking. The carpet carried her upward with the gentleness of a hand lifting a kitten and cradling it against a warm chest. Up, up into the night sky, above the buildings, above the city that had been her entire world until this moment. She could feel the night air beginning to move around her, cool against her fur, carrying with it all the scents of the city from far below. When the carpet finally leveled out and began to glide horizontally rather than climb, Mina lifted her head and looked around. She had to catch her breath. Below her, spread out in every direction, was her city. But it looked completely different from this vantage point. The streets, which she had always experienced as places she walked through, were now visible as long lines of light, connecting the buildings like threads in a vast web. The buildings themselves rose up like dark mountains, punctuated by hundreds upon hundreds of glowing windows. She could see patterns in the lights that she had never noticed before, clusters and designs that suggested life and meaning in their arrangement. And the lights, oh, the lights. Every light in every window seemed to have become sharper, brighter, more precious now that she could see so many of them at once. The city beneath her was alive with warmth and colour and meaning. The golden glow of the street lamps created pools of light at regular intervals along every street, like beacons marking the way. The white and yellow lights in the windows created a vast constellation of human presence and activity. each light representing people, lives, stories being lived in the rooms behind the glass. And scattered throughout, the red and green lights of traffic signals and the occasional burst of brighter light from a storefront or a public building added variety to the palette. The city seemed to be glowing from within, as if it had its own inner light, its own life force. It was, Mina thought, with a sense of wonder that was entirely new to her, absolutely beautiful. It was perfect. It was home. The carpet moved through the air with a smoothness that was almost like floating, almost like not moving at all. There was no jostling, no wind that threatened to unseat her, no sense of danger or instability. The night air was cool and fresh against her fur, carrying with it the sense of the city from far below, the cooking smells from restaurants, mixing garlic and spices and heat, the green smell of the park several blocks away, where trees grew and grass breathed, the mingled aromas of a city settling down for the evening, a mixture of car exhaust and perfume and pizza and laundry detergent. It was the smell of home, she realized. It was the smell of her neighborhood. Mina could hear, too, the sounds of the night shifting and changing beneath her. Car horns were muted and distant now, transformed into something almost musical by their distance. Music drifted up from a few buildings, someone playing a violin, the notes soaring and dipping like birds in flight. Someone else playing a radio from which a female voice sang a song that sounded like sadness and hope mixed together. And underneath it all, she could hear the deep, underlying hum of the city itself. A sound like breathing, like the city was a living thing, and she was finally able to hear its voice, the voice that had been calling to her all along. As the carpet carried her through the sky on this first miraculous flight, Mina felt something shifting inside her. She had spent 2 years in this city, day after day, watching and observing and taking comfort in the familiar patterns of streets and buildings and routines. She had found safety in her small world, satisfaction in her quiet role as observer and wanderer. But there had always been, beneath the contentment, a small note of wondering. What else was there? What lay beyond the boundaries of her neighborhood? What did it mean that there was so much beauty and life happening in all those lit windows, and she remained always on the outside, looking in? Had she been missing something essential, something that would help her understand her own place in the world? Now, flying above the city on this impossible carpet, she felt as though she was finally, for the first time, truly seeing her world. And it was so much larger, so much more complex and beautiful than she had ever imagined. The city spread out beneath her like a map of infinite possibility, like a book written in light and shadow and colour. Every street was a story. Every building was a world unto itself. Every light represented something, hope or comfort or love or longing. She was part of all of it, she realised. She had always been part of it, even when she thought she was separate, even when she thought she was on the outside looking in. She was woven into the fabric of this city, just as surely as the streets were woven together, just as surely as the buildings stood in relation to one another. This was her home, and now she was finally seeing it for what it truly was. Below her, the carpet continued its steady glide through the night sky. Mina could feel the magic of it beneath her, a constant hum of energy that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her own heartbeat. She was no longer frightened, no longer questioning. She had moved beyond doubt into a state of pure acceptance and wonder. As the carpet drifted over streets, she recognized the perspective shifted everything. The bakery on the corner, where she had eaten countless scraps, was now a small building with a lit window. The fire escape where she had sunbathed was now a small dark line on a building wall. The park where she sometimes ventured was a dark green space surrounded by buildings, but it was the windows that held her attention most. All those windows she had spent so much time watching from below. Now she was level with them as the carpet drifted. She could see into some of them clearly. In one window, an elderly couple sat together, watching television. They were holding hands, just as she had observed them doing so many times before. In another window, a woman moved about a kitchen. In a third, a child sat at a desk doing homework. These were the people she had observed from below, and now, flying above them, she felt a strange connection to them, a sense that they were all part of the same story, the same city, the same human experience. These were the people she had observed from below, and now, flying above them, she felt a strange connection to them, a sense that they were all part of the same story, the same city, the same human experience. The woman in the kitchen who was preparing dinner, the child doing homework, the elderly couple holding hands in the soft glow of television light. They were all part of the fabric of the city, just as surely as the streets and buildings. And she, small grey kitten that she was part of it too. She was woven into the story of this place, even if she had never understood it before this moment. The carpet glided onward through the night, and Mina found herself beginning to recognise neighbourhoods she knew. There, below her, was the street where the grocery store stood, the one where she sometimes found dropped produce in the alley behind it. And beyond that was the avenue with the coffee shop on the corner, the place where humans sat for hours, hunched over their cups and their papers and their thoughts. She had watched them through the windows countless times, observed their rituals of arrival and departure. Now she was seeing them from above, seeing how they fit into the larger geography of the city, how this coffee shop was connected to the buildings around it, how it stood in relation to everything else. Every place she had ever been, every street she had ever walked, suddenly made sense in a new way. Her world, which had seemed so large when she was on the ground, now appeared as a connected whole, a unified geography that stretched in all directions. The night air carried the smell of the city in different layers. Close to the carpet, she could smell the fresh coolness of the night itself, clean and sharp. A little farther away, she could smell the cooking that was happening in 100 kitchens below her, the mingled aromas of dinner being prepared, onions and garlic and spices mixing together. Even farther, she could smell the parks, the growing things, the green smell of life that persisted even in this urban landscape. And underneath it all, the ever-present smell of the city itself, the metal and rubber and concrete, the exhaust and the stone, the smell that meant home to her, the smell that meant safety and warmth and the familiar rhythms of her life. The lights below seemed to pulse and change as the carpet moved, creating patterns that were almost like music made visible. The street lamps created regular intervals of golden light, and the windows of the buildings created a more chaotic, but somehow more beautiful pattern, clusters of light and darkness that spoke of human presence and human absence. Some buildings were more brightly lit than others. In one area, she could see what looked like an office building, its windows glowing uniformly, suggesting rows of desks and computers and people still working despite the lateness of the hour. In another area, the lights were more scattered, more individual, suggesting residential buildings where families were settling in for the evening, turning off lights as they moved from one room to another. As Mina watched from her vantage point on the flying carpet, she began to understand something that had eluded her during all her time on the ground. The city was not just a collection of buildings and streets. It was a living organism, breathing and pulsing with life and energy. Each light represented a moment of human experience, a story being lived somewhere beneath the night sky. Each window was a world unto itself, complete and separate, and yet connected to all the other worlds around it. The city was infinitely complex and yet strangely simple when you looked at it from above. Everything connected to everything else. Everyone was part of everyone else's story, whether they knew it or not. The carpet continued its steady glide through the night sky, and Mina found herself settling more deeply into the moment, letting go of the last vestiges of fear or doubt. This was happening. It was real. She was flying above her city, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The wonder of it filled her completely, taking up all the space in her small chest where fear might have lived, replacing it with something warm and bright and alive. This was, she realized, the most magical moment of her entire life, and she wanted to hold on to it, to preserve it, to remember every detail of it for as long as she lived. The patterns of light below seemed to shift and change as the carpet moved, though Mina wasn't sure if the patterns were actually changing or if her perspective was simply shifting, causing her to see things differently. Either way, it seemed to her that the city was showing itself to her, revealing its secrets one by one. Every street corner held a story. Every building was a monument to human desire and human effort. Every light was a small prayer, a small hope, a small moment of connection between one person and another. She thought about the old woman in the third-floor apartment, the one who always let her sleep on the armchair by the radiator. The woman probably didn't even know Mina's name. She had never spoken it aloud, but she cared enough to leave the window open, enough to offer shelter and warmth to a small kitten with nowhere else to go. That act of kindness, so small, so quiet, so easily overlooked, had made all the difference in Mina's life. It had been one of the reasons she loved this neighborhood so much, one of the reasons she felt safe and at home here. And what about the baker? The baker had never asked for anything in return for the scraps of fish he left out. He simply knew that there was a small kitten who sometimes passed by, and he wanted to help. He wanted to offer comfort in the only way he knew how. These were the things that made the city beautiful, Mina thought. Not the buildings or the lights, though those were beautiful too, but the small acts of kindness, the quiet moments of one creature caring for another, the ways that humans and animals lived together in this space, sharing the same air, the same streets, the same night sky. As the carpet glided over a particularly brightly lit area, Mina could see more clearly into some of the windows. In one, she saw a young couple dancing together in their living room, moving slowly, holding each other. In another, she saw an artist painting at an easel, the canvas glowing under a bright lamp. In yet another, she saw an old man sitting alone, reading a book, his face illuminated by the lamp beside his chair. All of these moments, all of these small human dramas, were happening simultaneously in the city below her. The city was full of moments like this, full of small stories and small triumphs, and small moments of beauty. It was almost overwhelming to contemplate. The carpet began to slow its pace slightly, as if suggesting that it was time to move on to something new. The sensations that had filled Mina, the rush of wind, the sense of speed, the exhilaration of flight, began to mellow into something gentler, something slower. She could feel the magic of the carpet shifting, adjusting, preparing for whatever came next. She had no idea where they were going, and somehow that was exactly right. The not knowing felt like part of the magic, part of the adventure. She trusted the carpet completely. It had brought her this far safely, had shown her wonders she never could have imagined, had given her a gift beyond measure. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. The carpet began to descend slightly, losing just a little bit of altitude, though still flying far above the rooftops below. Mina's heart quickened with anticipation. Where were they going? What new wonders awaited? She had spent so long wanting to see beyond the boundaries of her familiar neighborhood, and now, with each moment that passed, those boundaries were expanding. That world was growing. The city below her was not just the few blocks she had walked 1,000 times. It was so much more than that. It was vast and complex and full of endless possibility. And she was part of it. She had always been part of it, she understood now. She was beginning to see it, to understand it, to feel her place within it. The market district appeared before her quite suddenly, as if materializing out of the darkness. One moment there was just the regular grid of streets and buildings, and the next there was something entirely different. The area seemed to glow with a different kind of light, brighter and more chaotic than the residential areas she had been flying over. The streets below were wider, the buildings lower and broader, the arrangement of windows and doors more purposeful. This was a place designed for commerce, for the buying and selling of goods, for the gathering of people in large numbers. Even at this late hour, Mina could see that the area was not completely dark or sleeping. There were lights on in some of the buildings, signs glowing in windows, indication that life and activity persisted even after the normal business hours had ended. The carpet descended further, bringing Mina closer to the streets of the market district. Now she could see details that had been invisible from higher up. There were stalls and carts parked along the street, covered with tarps and tied down with rope. She could make out the shapes of things beneath the tarps, presumably the goods that would be sold the next day. There were restaurants with their shuttered windows and locked doors, waiting for morning when they would open again to serve the early morning crowds. There were specialty shops selling things she couldn't quite make out, perhaps spices, perhaps fabrics, perhaps 100 different things that people needed and wanted. But what struck Mina most powerfully was the smell. The market district, even closed and dark and quiet, smelled like possibility. It smelled like 1,000 different foods and spices and goods, all mingled together into a scent that was complex and rich and entirely foreign to anything she had experienced before. There was cinnamon and nutmeg, clove and cardamom, all the spices that grew in distant lands. There was coffee and tea and chocolate. There was something that smelled like fish, and something that smelled like meat hanging in a butcher's shop. There was the smell of fresh fruit and fresh vegetables, the smell of growing things that had been harvested and brought to this place to be sold and eaten, and underneath it all, the smell of the human marketplace, the smell of commerce and transaction and exchange, the smell of people coming together to meet their needs. The carpet moved slowly now through the streets of the market district, and Mina found her eyes growing wide as she took in all the details. She could see where the vendors set up their stalls during the day. She could see the careful arrangement of display tables, the hooks hanging from frameworks where goods could be suspended. She could see the cash registers and the scales, all the tools of the marketplace arranged and waiting. It was like seeing the bones of something, the structure that supported the flesh of daily commerce. Without the people and the activity, the market district seemed almost like a stage set, waiting for the actors to arrive and bring it to life. And yet, even as she looked at the empty stalls and the quiet buildings, Mina could imagine what this place would be like during the day. She could picture the crowds of people moving between stalls, stopping to examine goods, to haggle over prices, to fill their baskets and bags with the things they needed. She could imagine the sounds, the calling out of vendors, the chatter of shoppers, the sounds of money changing hands and goods being wrapped in paper. She could imagine the energy and chaos and liveliness of this place when it was full of people and activity, and she could understand why people loved it, why they came here day after day, drawn by the promise of finding something they needed, something they wanted, something that would make their lives a little bit better. As the carpet continued its slow drift through the market district, Mina began to notice details that brought the scene to life even in its quietness. There were benches where people sat to rest and observe the marketplace. There were fountains, places where water flowed and created small oases of quiet in the midst of the chaos. There were bulletin boards where announcements were posted, messages from vendors about their goods and their prices. There was a small shrine tucked into a corner, a place where people could pause for a moment of reflection or prayer. All of these details spoke to her of the humanity of this place, the ways that people had shaped and molded this space to serve their needs and honor their values. She could see, from her vantage point on the carpet, how the market district connected to the rest of the city, The streets that led into it came from different neighborhoods, different parts of town, all bringing people together to this central place. The market district was a hub, a gathering place, a point of intersection and exchange. It was where the city's different communities came together, where strangers became neighbors, if only for a moment. She had never been to the market district herself, she realized. It was one of those places in her city that had existed beyond the boundaries of her known world. But now, flying above it, seeing it spread out beneath her like a map of human need and human desire, she felt as though she finally understood it. She understood why people loved it. She understood why it was important. She understood that every city, no matter how large or how small, needed a place like this. A marketplace where goods and information and human connection could be exchanged. The carpet was beginning to rise again, pulling away from the market district, moving on to whatever new wonders awaited. Mina felt a strange sense of gratitude for what she had just witnessed. This place, which she had not known existed beyond a vague awareness of a marketplace somewhere in the city, had now become real to her, had become part of her experience. She had seen it from a perspective that no ordinary cat, no ordinary person even, could access. She had seen the essence of it, the structure beneath the surface, the bones of the place before it was clothed in the daily activity of commerce and human exchange. As the carpet climbed higher, carrying her away from the market district, Mina could feel the magic shifting once again, preparing for the next part of the journey. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew that it would be wonderful. She knew that every moment of this night was a gift, a treasure that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. She had left her small, quiet world behind, and she had entered into a realm of wonder and magic that was beyond her wildest imaginings. And somehow, impossibly, she felt more at home than ever before. The air around her grew slightly cooler and fresher as the carpet continued to rise and move through the night. The smell of the market district faded gradually, replaced by new scents carried on the evening breeze. The lights below began to spread out more sparsely as they left the denser urban landscape behind. The city below was transforming, revealing new areas, new neighborhoods, new possibilities. Mina settled more deeply into the soft folds of the carpet, her heart full of wonder, her mind racing with thoughts and impressions and sensations. This was happening. This was real. She was flying through the night sky above her city, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Before long, the nature of the lights below began to change. The regular grid of streets gave way to larger open spaces. The dense clusters of buildings became sparser. The white and yellow lights of the urban landscape were joined by a different kind of light, a softer, greener light that seemed to be coming from a different source entirely. Mina leaned forward on the carpet, straining her eyes to see what lay ahead. The magic beneath her seemed to sense her curiosity, seemed to respond to it, and the carpet continued to move in the direction she was looking, as if reading her desires and answering them. As they drew closer, Mina's breath caught in her throat. It was a park. A massive park, far larger than the small green space she had glimpsed earlier in the evening. This park stretched for what seemed like a vast distance, a great dark expanse dotted with trees and walking paths and open grassy areas. But what made it truly magical was the way it was lit. Along the paths and around the perimeter, strings of lights had been hung. Small bulbs in soft white and warm gold colours stretched from tree to tree, creating patterns of light and shadow that were almost like constellations brought down from the sky. And the trees themselves, the trees were glowing, not with electric lights, but with something that seemed almost natural, as if the trees themselves had absorbed the magic of the evening and were radiating it back out into the darkness. The bark glowed faintly, and the leaves seemed to shimmer with colour, deep greens and golds and hints of silver. It was the most beautiful thing Mina had ever seen, and for a moment she could hardly believe it was real. The carpet descended as if in response to her wonder, bringing her lower, closer to the park below. Now she could see the details more clearly. The paths were lined with benches, places where people would sit during the day to rest and watch others pass by. There were fountains, not unlike the ones in the marketplace, creating pools of still water that reflected the lights above. There were gardens, laid out in careful patterns, with flowers that would bloom in their seasons and create beauty throughout the year. And there were trees, so many trees, of so many different varieties, some towering and ancient, some younger and more delicate, all of them somehow participating in the magic of the evening. The carpet moved slowly through the air above the park, and Mina found her eyes following the paths that wound through it like threads. These were paths for walking, for humans and animals alike to move through the green space. During the day, the park would be full of people, children playing, adults walking and talking, old people sitting on benches and watching the world go by. But at this hour, the park seemed to belong entirely to itself, to nature, to magic. The trees swayed gently in the night breeze, and their glowing leaves danced and rippled with light. As she watched, Mina began to notice details that added to the magic. In one corner of the park, she could see what looked like a small pavilion, a covered structure where people could gather or rest out of the weather. In another corner, there appeared to be a small playground, with structures for children to climb and swing from. In the center of the park, there was a large open space, what would be perfect for gatherings or celebrations, or simply for lying on the grass and looking at the sky. And scattered throughout, there were smaller paths that led off into darker, more secluded areas, places where one could find privacy and quiet and peace. The park, Mina understood, was a gift. It was a place that the city had created, that the people who lived here had created, as a reminder that even in the midst of buildings and concrete and urban life, nature persisted. Even in the heart of the city, there was room for green growing things, for open spaces, for the kind of beauty that could only come from nature allowed to express itself. The park was a promise, a statement that the city and nature could coexist, that humans could live in proximity to the natural world without destroying it. As the carpet drifted over the park, Mina found herself thinking about the places in her neighborhood where she had sometimes found grass or flowers or growing things. The small garden behind the bakery where herbs grew in pots and flowers bloomed in their seasons. The occasional tree breaking through the concrete, defying the odds, pushing its way up through the sidewalk with its roots, determined to grow despite the hostile environment. The way that vines sometimes grew up the sides of buildings, softening their harsh edges with green. All of these small manifestations of nature in her neighborhood suddenly seemed like tiny versions of this grand park, small concessions that the city made to the natural world, small ways that the urban landscape acknowledged the beauty and necessity of the living world. The lights of the park, glowing beneath her, seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Each light was like a small beacon, a small signal that this place was sacred, that it was special, that it deserved to be honored and protected. The glow of the trees seemed almost alive, as if they were breathing with her, as if they too were part of this magical night journey. As the carpet began to rise again, carrying her away from the park and deeper into the night, Mina felt something shifting inside her. She was beginning to understand the city in a new way, to see it as something living and breathing and beautiful. Something that was far more complex and wonderful than she could have imagined when she was down below, walking its streets as a small, unknown kitten. The night air around her grew noticeably cooler and fresher now, carrying with it new scents that were different from anything she had experienced in the heart of the city. There was the smell of water, a sharp, clean, salty smell that spoke of the sea or a large body of water nearby. There was the smell of boats and rope and wooden docks. There was a smell of distance, of horizons, of things beyond the city's boundaries. The carpet was moving toward the edges of the city now, toward the places where the urban landscape met the natural world, where the city ended and something else began. As they travelled, the lights below became sparser and more scattered. The regular grid of streets gave way to curved roads and irregular patterns. The buildings became lower and more spread out, with more space between them, more room for other things. And then, quite suddenly, the buildings ended altogether, and below her was a vast open space, dark and glittering with reflected light, stretching away into the distance in a way that seemed infinite. The harbour. Mina understood it immediately, even though she had never been there. This was where the city met the water, where the land ended and the sea began. The carpet descended slowly, bringing her lower, closer to the water's edge. Now she could see the boats, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, tied up at docks and piers. They ranged from small fishing boats to large cargo ships, each one rocking gently in the water, tethered by ropes to the docks. The lights of the harbour reflected off the water, creating a mirror image that doubled the beauty of the scene. The water itself was alive with reflected light. The lights of the boats and the docks and the buildings beyond the harbour all cast their glow onto the surface of the water, creating patterns of light and shadow that constantly shifted and changed. It was almost like watching a dance, the way the light moved across the water, the way the reflections wavered and transformed. And somewhere far away, beyond the reach of the city's lights, Mina could sense the vastness of the sea, the endless horizon, the world beyond. The boats seemed to her like the resting places of travellers, of people who had journeyed to distant lands and returned home, or who were preparing to journey out into the unknown. Each boat carried stories, carried the history of the sea, written into its wooden hull and its weathered sails. The ropes that held them to the docks were thick and strong, designed to withstand storms and strain, designed to keep the boats safe and secure while allowing them the freedom to move with the water's motion. Mina could see, even from her vantage point on the carpet, that the harbour was in the process of settling down for the night. The lights on the boats were beginning to fade, one by one, as the crews bedded down for the evening. The docks, which would be bustling with activity during the day, were now quiet and still. The water was calm, reflecting the lights in long streaks of silver and gold. It was a place of transition, a place between the city and the sea, between the known and the unknown, between day and night. As the carpet moved slowly over the harbour, Mina found herself imagining what it would be like during the day, when the docks were full of people moving goods, when the boats were setting out or returning from journeys, when the harbour was alive with activity and commerce and adventure. But she could also appreciate the quiet beauty of it at night, the way that the harbour seemed to exist in a state of peace and rest, preparing for the next day's activity. The magic of the carpet seemed to pulse beneath her, matching the rhythm of the water below. They were moving slowly now, and the pace was dreamlike and peaceful. All the wonder and excitement of the journey so far seemed to have condensed into this moment. This quiet observation of the harbour and the boats and the vast expanse of water stretching away into the darkness. Far in the distance, beyond the harbour, Mina could see the horizon where the water met the sky. There were no lights there, no signs of civilization. It was just darkness meeting darkness, with a subtle line of distinction between them. The sea beyond the harbour seemed to go on forever, seemed to represent everything that was unknown and mysterious in the world. And yet, it didn't frighten her. It simply filled her with a sense of peace and understanding. There was so much more to the world than she had ever realized, so much more than the few blocks of the city that she had known so well. The carpet circled lazily over the harbour, showing her different views, different angles. In one direction, she could see the city rising up behind the harbour, its buildings dark or glowing with scattered lights. In another direction, she could see more open water, more boats, more of the maritime life that existed beyond the main city. And in yet another direction, she could see what looked like smaller residential areas, neighborhoods built near the water's edge, homes that faced out onto the harbor and the sea beyond. These people, living here in these waterfront homes, woke each morning to the sight of the boats and the water and the vast horizon. They lived with a constant reminder of the world beyond the city, a constant invitation to adventure and exploration and expansion. Mina thought about how different their lives must be from hers, how living near the water must change the way you thought about your place in the world. But in another way, it was not so different. They too were seeking comfort and safety, seeking a place where they could belong, seeking to be part of a community and a home. The water was simply the framework within which they conducted their search, the boundary that shaped their world. As the carpet began to move away from the harbor, rising slightly into the night air, Mina could feel the magic continuing to pulse beneath her. The journey was not over. There was still more to see, more to experience, more to understand about her city and her place within it. And as the lights of the harbor fell away behind her and new sights began to appear ahead, she settled deeper into the soft fabric of the carpet and let herself drift into the wonder of it all, trusting completely in the magic that was carrying her through this most extraordinary night. The carpet climbed higher still, carrying Mina away from the harbor. The city below shifted and changed as the magic continued to work its transformations. Each neighborhood had its own rhythm, and she found herself becoming more attuned to the subtle differences in light and sound and smell. Then, rising up before her, like a sentinel watching over the city, she saw the clock tower. It was massive, dominating the skyline. The tower was constructed of old stone that had weathered countless years, illuminated by spotlights that made it glow from within. The clock face itself was enormous, a constant reminder that time was passing, that everything was always moving forward. Mina had heard the clock tower bell many times during her days in the city. The sound would ring out across the neighborhoods, marking each hour with a deep and resonant tone that seemed to come from the very heart of the city. But now, seeing the tower from above, understanding its role as a keeper of time for all the people who lived and worked below, she felt a sudden sense of connection to it. This tower was a marker, a point of reference, a way for people to stay connected to the passage of time. In a city that sometimes seemed chaotic, the tower provided structure and order, a shared understanding of when things would happen. The carpet descended slightly, bringing her closer so she could see the details more clearly. The stone walls were carved with patterns and designs. There were gargoyles perched on the corners, stone creatures with fierce expressions. At the very top was a spire, topped with a weather vane that caught the light and glinted softly, turning slowly in the breeze. As the carpet circled the tower, Mina realized that the entire city seemed to spread out beneath it like a map. All the neighborhoods she had traveled over, all the roads and buildings and open spaces, they all seemed to connect back to this central point. The tower was not just a keeper of time, it was also a center point, a place from which all other places could be understood in relation to it. The light from the clock face created a pool of illumination in the darkness. Mina found herself staring at it, watching as the minute hand ticked slowly forward. How many moments had passed during her journey tonight? But time did not matter in the same way when you were flying above the city. The normal rules seemed suspended. She could be completely present without worrying about where she needed to be. The carpet had freed her from the constraints of time, had given her the gift of presence. The tower seemed to acknowledge her understanding. And then the clock face chimed, a deep and resonant sound that rolled out across the city like a wave. The sound was magnificent, filled with harmony and depth, containing all the beauty and meaning of the tower itself. Mina realized that she was hearing the city from above in a way that few creatures ever would. The sound of the clock bell carried into the homes of people who might pause for a moment to note the time. But it also carried something deeper. It spoke of continuity, of tradition and history, of all the people who had listened to this same bell ring out across the years. As the carpet began to move away, Mina felt she had learned something important. The clock tower was not just an isolated structure. It was part of a larger whole, connected to everything else in the city. And she too was part of that whole. Her small life, her small moments of wonder and discovery were all part of the larger story of the city. The tower kept time for all of them, for her, and for everyone else who lived within the sound of its bell. The darkness seemed to deepen as they left the bright illumination behind. But Mina did not feel frightened. Instead, she felt held by it, as though the night itself was carrying her forward towards some important destination. The magic of the carpet pulsed beneath her, steady and sure. The streets below became more tree-lined, with larger spaces between buildings. The city was revealing its softer side, the side that cared about beauty and peace and community. Gardens were visible, even in the darkness. The streets curved more organically here, following the natural contours of the land. These were the streets where people built their homes, raised their families, created the small moments that made up a life. In the darkness of night, with their windows glowing softly, these neighborhoods seemed to pulse with a quiet kind of warmth. Every light represented someone's home, someone's refuge, someone's place of safety and rest. As they drifted deeper into these residential streets, the carpet seemed to slow even further, weaving between buildings, following the curves of the roads. It was as if the magic was deliberately allowing her to see and appreciate the details of this quieter, more intimate side of the city. After the vast spaces of the harbour, after the soaring height of the clock tower, these smaller, more personal spaces felt like a homecoming. Mina's own pace began to slow as well. Her breathing deepened, her mind quieted. The wonder and excitement that had filled her earlier was still there, but now mingled with a sense of peace and contentment. As they moved through the streets, she began to recognize some of the landmarks from her nighttime wanderings. There was the street where the kind woman left food out. There was the alley where the old tomcat hunted. The corner where the street musicians sometimes played. But seeing them from above, seeing how they fit into the larger geography of the city, gave them new meaning. They were not isolated moments in her small cat's life. They were part of something much larger, much more meaningful. The streets shifted character as they entered another neighborhood. The buildings became a different style, older with a distinct personality. The lights in the windows had a particularly warm quality, as if the glass itself had been colored by decades or centuries of warmth emanating from within. These were old homes, homes that had sheltered generations of people, homes that had absorbed the stories and experiences of countless families. She could see the history in the architecture, in the careful details of the construction. These were buildings meant to last, meant to shelter people through years and decades and even centuries. The carpet moved slowly down the main streets of this historic neighborhood. This was the old city, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. There was something deeply comforting about that, something that spoke to her need for stability and history and connection to something larger than herself. Many of the buildings had small plaques attached to their facades. Mina could not read them from the carpet, but she could feel the weight of history in them, could sense the stories they held. The current residents had also shaped these neighborhoods, had added their own stories to the existing narratives. Gardens surrounding the buildings showed care and attention. Lights glowed warmly in windows, suggesting warm and comfortable homes. In one window she saw the glow of a fireplace. In another, bookshelves catching the light in ways that suggested a home filled with knowledge. In yet another, a silhouette of a person moving slowly. These were intimate moments, private glimpses into lives. And somehow, flying above them, Mina did not feel like an intruder. She felt like she was being shown something important, something meant to be seen and understood. As the carpet glided through these streets, Mina found herself thinking about home in a new way. Home was not just the spot where she'd been born, or the places where she had found food or shelter. Home was a connection to place, a sense of belonging to something that had meaning and history and continuity. It was a web of relationships and memories and stories that bound a creature to a place, that made that place feel uniquely right, uniquely safe, uniquely theirs. The buildings seemed to whisper their stories as the carpet passed, seemed to offer their knowledge and their comfort. And Mina listened, not with her ears, but with her heart, with that deeper part of her that was beginning to understand the true nature of her city. As they left the historic neighborhood and moved into another area, the character of the streets changed once more. The buildings became slightly newer. The lights in the windows were still warm and welcoming, but there was a different feeling here, a different sense of community. The streets became broader, and the spaces between buildings expanded. Parks appeared, small green spaces tucked between the buildings, places where people could gather and rest. Everything about this neighborhood suggested a life lived at a slower pace than in the dense urban core, but a pace still connected to the larger city. Mina found herself recognizing some of the streets, some of the buildings. This was closer to the neighborhood where she lived, closer to the familiar territory of her daily existence. And as they moved through these streets, she began to understand something fundamental about her city. It was not monolithic. It was a collection of neighborhoods, each with its own character and history and community. All of these different neighborhoods came together to create the larger whole that was the city. She had been living in just one small corner of this vast and complex organism. How many other parts of the city had she never seen? How many other communities and stories were happening in places she had never heard of? The wonder of it filled her. The city was so much larger and more complex than she had ever imagined. And she was part of it, connected to it, woven into its fabric. The carpet was beginning to descend more noticeably now, bringing her lower over the rooftops. She could smell it again, that fresh-moving water smell. They were approaching the river that marked one edge of this section of the city. Her heart quickened with anticipation. A river. A new landscape entirely. What would she find there? What new beauty would the magic reveal? The river appeared before her in all its nighttime glory, and the sight took her breath away. The water was dark, but reflecting the lights that hung along its banks, creating patterns of silver and gold that danced and rippled with the movement of the current. But what made the river truly magical, what made Mina's heart catch in her chest, was the lanterns. Hanging from frameworks that stretched across the river and lined its banks were hundreds, perhaps thousands, of lanterns. Each lantern glowed with a soft, warm light, creating a tunnel of illumination above the dark water. Some were strung in straight lines along the banks. Others were arranged in circular patterns or spiraling designs that caught the eye and drew it deeper into the landscape. The effect was almost overwhelming in its beauty. It was as if the city had decided that the river was too important, too beautiful, too central to its own existence to leave in darkness. So they had hung these lanterns, these thousands of small glowing points of light, to honor the river and to create a pathway of light for anyone who needed to find their way through the darkness. Mina had never seen anything like it before. She had not known that such a place existed in her city. But now that she was seeing it, now that she was floating above it on her magical carpet, she could not imagine that she had ever lived here without witnessing this beauty. The water of the river reflected the light of the lanterns, creating an effect that was almost like flying through a ribbon of light itself. The dark water was transformed by the reflected glow into something that seemed almost solid, almost tangible. The boundaries between the water and the light and the sky above seemed to blur and merge into a unified whole. The carpet moved slowly along the river, following its curves, showing Mina the way that the lanterns followed the water's path, bending and turning with the river as it moved through the city. In some places the river widened and there were more lanterns, creating more light and more beauty. In other places, the river narrowed, and the lanterns created a more concentrated line of light. Below the lanterns, on the banks of the river, Mina could see more structures. There were platforms and terraces where people could gather to view the river during the day. There were restaurants with windows that looked out onto the water, currently dark and closed, but which would come alive during daylight hours with the sounds of people dining and enjoying the view. There were parks with paths and benches where people could walk along the riverbank and enjoy the movement of the water. This was clearly an important part of the city, a place that had been developed with care and attention, a place that was valued and treasured by the people who lived here. The beauty of the lanterns was not accidental. It was deliberate, intentional, a statement of the city's commitment to honoring the natural beauty of the river while also adapting it for human enjoyment and connection. As the carpet continued to drift along the river, Mina began to notice details that she had missed at first glance. The lanterns were not all identical. While they all glowed with a similar warm light, they had different shapes and sizes, different designs. Some were simple spheres of light. Others were more ornate, shaped like flowers or animals or abstract patterns. The variety in the designs added an artistic quality to the installation, suggesting that the lanterns had been hung by someone who understood beauty, who understood how to create something that was both functional and aesthetically meaningful. The river itself was alive in ways that Mina had not fully appreciated from below. She could see the current moving, could see the way the water flowed around obstacles and banks, could understand the force and vitality of this liquid vein that ran through the city. The river was not static. It was dynamic, always moving, always changing, carrying water and life and meaning through the landscape. And now, in the nighttime hours, with the lanterns glowing above it, the river had taken on an almost mystical quality. It was as if the water and the light were in conversation with each other, reflecting and responding to each other, creating a dialogue that was expressed in the dance of reflected illumination on the dark water. The platforms and terraces along the banks were empty now, but Mina could imagine what they would look like during the day, or in the evening when the sun was setting, and people came to the river to watch the light change on the water. The river was a gathering place, she understood. It was a place where the city came to remember its connection to the natural world, to the water that sustained it, to the beauty that existed beyond the concrete and the buildings. The lanterns were like a celebration of this connection, like a statement that said, "This place matters, this water matters, this beauty matters." As the carpet continued to follow the river's path through the city, Mina found herself experiencing a kind of profound peace. All of the excitement and wonder of the earlier parts of the journey were still present, but they had been joined by something calmer, something more centered. She was beginning to understand that the city was not just about movement and achievement and commerce. It was also about beauty, about connection to nature, about taking time to appreciate the small moments of loveliness that existed all around. The river seemed to slow the pace of everything. The carpet moved more deliberately now, giving her time to truly observe and appreciate what she was seeing. There was no sense of rushing, no sense of needing to move on to the next thing. Time seemed to have stretched into something larger and more malleable. The curve of the river ahead showed more lanterns, more platforms, more evidence of the care that had been invested in this space, and the carpet, responding to what seemed to be some internal sense of the journey's rhythm, continued forward, ready to show her more, ready to reveal more beauty, ready to carry her toward whatever understanding awaited. The water of the river seemed to call to her, seemed to invite her to rest in its presence, to allow it to calm her and soothe her. And Mina, floating above it on her magical carpet, allowed herself to sink deeper into the moment, to let go of questions and concerns, to simply exist in the presence of this extraordinary beauty. The lantern stretched on before her and behind her, creating an endless path of light, a luminous corridor that seemed to connect everything, to bind the city together, to make whole and unified what might otherwise be separate and disconnected. The river and the lanterns together created a healing presence in the nighttime city, a reminder that beauty and meaning could be found in the intentional choices that humans made about how to structure their lives and their spaces. As the carpet began to slow even further, as the pace of the journey became almost meditative, Mina realized that she was approaching something significant. The magic beneath her was shifting again, preparing for another transformation. But for now, she was content to float here, above the river with its glowing lanterns, watching the dance of light and shadow on the water, feeling the peace and the beauty of this place washing over her, transforming her, becoming part of her understanding of the city that was her home. The carpet was carrying her forward, but also carrying her deeper into understanding, deeper into the heart of what it meant to exist in this place, to be part of this community, to have a home in this vast and beautiful and complex organism that was the city. And somewhere ahead, beyond the curves of the river, beyond the reach of the lantern light, there was more magic waiting, more beauty, more understanding, more wonder. As the carpet rose slightly from its position above the river, leaving the glowing lanterns behind, Mina could see more of the city stretched out beyond the water. The river had been a kind of boundary, a place where one landscape gave way to another. On the side they were leaving behind, the city had a particular character, a particular density and arrangement. But on the side ahead, something different awaited. The buildings here seemed lower, more spread out, with more space between them. The rooftops were visible now in greater detail, and what Mina saw there made her realize that she was approaching something entirely different from what she had experienced so far. On the rooftops, even in the darkness, she could make out the shapes of plants, gardens, rooftop gardens, growing on top of the buildings themselves, transforming the urban landscape into something that was partially wild, partially cultivated, partially natural and partially human-made. The carpet was beginning to ascend now, rising higher above the streets below, carrying her up toward the rooftops where these gardens were growing. The air seemed to shift, to become fresher, cooler, carrying with it the scent of growing things, of soil and leaves and the green life that was thriving on top of the buildings. This was a neighborhood, she understood, that had decided to bring nature back into the urban landscape in a deliberate and intentional way. The rooftop gardens were not accidental. They had been planned, designed, cultivated. They represented a choice that the people here had made, a statement about what they valued, about what they wanted their lives and their community to be like. The carpet rose higher, bringing her closer to the rooftop gardens, close enough that she could begin to make out the details. There were raised beds filled with soil. There were plants growing in them, vegetables and herbs and flowering plants. There were pathways between the beds where people could walk. There were benches where they could sit and rest among the growing things. On some of the rooftops, there appeared to be small structures, greenhouses perhaps, or storage sheds for gardening tools and supplies. The gardens were clearly well maintained, clearly loved, clearly important to the people who had created them. And the most magical thing about them was the way that they were lit. In some cases, strings of small lights had been hung among the plants, creating the effect of gardens that glowed from within. In other cases, the gardens were lit more subtly, with just enough light to see the shapes and outlines of the plants, but all of them seemed to have been lit with care and attention, with an awareness that these gardens were beautiful and deserved to be seen and appreciated even in the darkness of night. Mina found her breath catching in her throat as the carpet brought her higher still, allowing her to see more and more of these rooftop gardens stretching across multiple buildings, creating a patchwork landscape of green and growing things in the heart of the urban environment. It was like discovering a hidden world, a world that existed above the streets and the buildings, a world that most people probably never saw, a world that belonged primarily to birds and insects and, on this extraordinary night, to a small kitten riding a magical flying carpet. The garden seemed to call to her, seemed to invite her to understand something important about the relationship between humans and nature, about the possibility of creating beauty and abundance, even in a place that was fundamentally artificial and constructed. These rooftop gardens were an act of hope, a statement that even in the city, even in the densest and most developed areas, there was still room for nature, still room for growing things, still room for connection to the earth. The carpet moved slowly among the rooftops now, weaving between the buildings, showing her garden after garden, each one slightly different from the others, each one reflecting the personality and preferences of the people who had created it. Some gardens were more formal, arranged in neat rows and precise patterns. Others were more wild, more free-form, with plants growing in abundance and profusion. Some seemed to be focused on practical production, growing vegetables and herbs that could be eaten. Others were more focused on beauty, growing flowers and ornamental plants. But all of them, regardless of their design or their purpose, spoke to the same fundamental impulse. Humans, even in the midst of their cities, even when surrounded by concrete and steel, wanted connection to nature. They wanted to grow things. They wanted to nurture life. They wanted to create beauty. And here, on these rooftops, they had found a way to do it. They had taken the unused space above their buildings and transformed it into something alive, something growing, something that connected them to the rhythms of the seasons and the cycles of nature. Mina could see people moving on some of the rooftops, even in the darkness. Or perhaps she was imagining them. Perhaps the magic of the carpet was allowing her to see not just what was there, but what had been there, what would be there, what was possible. There seemed to be a woman tending her plants in one garden, a young couple sitting together on a bench, surrounded by growing things. An old man, perhaps, sitting in contemplation, looking out over his garden and his city. Or perhaps these were just impressions, just the sense of the people who loved these places, who had created them, who spent time in them. The boundary between what was actually there and what was conjured by the magic seemed to be becoming increasingly blurred as the night progressed. The carpet continued its gentle glide among the rooftops, showing her more gardens, more examples of human creativity and care, more evidence of the connection that people maintained with nature, even in the most urban of settings. It was beautiful, all of it. It was hopeful. It was a reminder that even in a place as fundamentally artificial as a city, there was room for the real and the natural and the alive. As the carpet began to rise higher still, bringing her above the level of the rooftop gardens, Mina could see how they fit into the larger pattern of the city. They were not isolated incidents. There were too many of them for that. The creation of these rooftop gardens must have been an intentional movement, a cultural shift, a decision made by the people of the city to transform their environment in this way. The rooftops below glowed with the soft lights of the gardens, creating a different kind of cityscape from what she had seen before. This was a city that was learning to coexist with nature, that was making room for the natural world within its own structure, that was finding ways to honor both the needs of human habitation and the needs of the living world. And as Mina floated above it all, held safe and secure by the magic of the carpet, she found herself beginning to cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty and hope of it all. The city, which she had always seen as something separate from and opposed to nature, was actually full of efforts to reconnect with the natural world, to honor it, to incorporate it into human life. She had walked these streets without seeing these gardens. She had lived in this city without understanding the depth of its commitment to beauty and sustainability and connection. But now, seeing it all from above, understanding how all the pieces fit together, she was overwhelmed with gratitude and love for this place that had sheltered her, that had given her home, that had given her so much. The magic of the carpet pulsed beneath her, warm and alive, responding to her emotions, responding to her new understanding. The journey was transforming her in ways she could not have anticipated. She was beginning to understand that her city was not just a collection of streets and buildings. It was a living, breathing, growing organism that was constantly trying to balance progress and preservation, development and sustainability, human needs and natural needs. And her own small life, her own small existence as a small grey kitten, was part of that larger story. She was part of the city, and the city was part of her. They were connected, intertwined, dependent upon each other. As the carpet began to slow its pace even further, as the nighttime air grew softer and more peaceful around her, Mina found herself feeling more at home than she ever had before. This was her city. These were her streets, her neighborhoods, her river with its glowing lanterns, her rooftop gardens. And she was finally beginning to understand what that meant, finally beginning to grasp the significance of being part of this place, of having a home here, of being woven into the fabric of this community. The magic of the carpet was carrying her towards something. She could sense it. The journey was nearing its final chapter, and whatever came next, whatever the last wonder would be, Mina felt that she was ready for it. She had been prepared by everything that had come before. She had been shown the breadth and depth and complexity of her city. She had been taught to see beauty in all of its forms, and she was ready to go home. But first, there was one more thing to see, one more wonder to experience, one final gift that the magic had prepared for her. The carpet began to shift its direction, turning away from the rooftop gardens, moving toward a new location. Mina could feel the magic building again, preparing for the final chapter of this extraordinary night. Whatever came next, she would face it with an open heart and a mind full of wonder. The city had shown her its secrets. The magic had revealed its gifts. And she was no longer the same small kitten who had curled up on her familiar rooftop what felt like a lifetime ago. She had been transformed by wonder. She had been enlarged by understanding. She had been changed by beauty. And the night, still full of magic and possibility, still holding mysteries yet to be revealed, continued to carry her forward toward whatever came next. The carpet rose higher, higher still, carrying Mina up through the night air towards something she could not yet see, but could feel drawing her forward with a kind of gentle insistence, a pull that was not forced, but rather like a natural current in the sky itself. The city below began to recede, began to diminish, the individual buildings and streets dissolving into patterns of light that looked less like a landscape and more like a vast painting rendered in gold and amber and soft white. A masterpiece of light and shadow created by the infinite inhabitants of this place going about their lives in the darkness. The rooftop gardens, which had seemed so vast and infinite when she was moving among them, began to compress into clusters of glowing points, small sparkles of illumination that became part of the larger tapestry of a light that was the city at night. The neighborhoods she had traveled through, neighborhoods that had seemed so vast from street level and even from a moderate height, began to appear as distinct blocks, as sections in a larger whole, as pieces in a puzzle that was only now becoming visible in its entirety. As she ascended, the air grew noticeably cooler, grew crisper, carrying with it a freshness that seemed to wash away the weariness of the long journey, the accumulated fatigue of all the wonder and excitement and new experiences. The coolness was like a gentle touch, like cool water on warm skin, refreshing and restorative. The noise of the city, which had always been present at least as a background whisper, something you learned not to hear, began to fade, began to recede into distance, replaced by something quieter, something that felt almost like the sound of her own breathing magnified and echoed around her, as though her small heart and her small lungs had become the dominant sound in the world. The magic of the carpet pulsed beneath her in a steady rhythm that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat, the two of them matching their pace, matching their rhythms, until it became impossible to tell where the magic ended and her own life force began. The magic was warm beneath her, was steady, was reliable. The purple fabric seemed to glow slightly, seemed to hold her with a kind of tangible care, as if the magic itself had feelings, had investment in her safety and her journey. She found herself trusting it completely now, trusting in the magic that had chosen to carry her through this extraordinary night, trusting that it would not let her fall, that it would carry her to whatever destination had been planned for her all along. The clouds appeared gradually, or perhaps they had always been there and she was only now rising up to meet them. They surrounded her, soft and yielding, wrapping around the carpet like a blanket. The lights of the city below became diffused, transformed into a soft glow that came up through the clouds from beneath. She could no longer see individual buildings or streets or neighborhoods. She could only see this glow, this warmth, this sense of the city breathing beneath her, living and vibrant and full of life. But something was changing. Something profound was happening. As the carpet continued to rise, continued its upward journey through the cooler air, the clouds began to part, began to thin, began to reveal what lay beyond. And above the clouds, something extraordinary was revealed. Something so vast and so beautiful that Mina found her breath catching in her chest, found herself unable to move, unable to do anything but stare. Stars. Thousands upon thousands of stars, countless beyond counting, filling the sky above her, spread out in patterns that seemed both infinite and somehow deeply intimate, as if each one had been placed with intention and care. These were stars that she had never seen from the streets of the city, stars that the light pollution of the urban environment had hidden from her view all her life. The city lights were bright, were everywhere, were impossible to escape, and they drowned out the light of these distant suns, made them invisible to anyone looking up from the streets below. But now, here, above the clouds, floating on her magic carpet with nothing between her and the infinite expanse of the universe, she could see them all, every single one. The light of each star seemed to reach down and touch her, seemed to recognize her, seemed to welcome her into this cosmic realm that had been invisible to her until this moment. The stars did not twinkle as she had imagined they would when she was a small kitten looking up at the night sky from the streets of her city. Instead, they burned with a steady light, a constant presence, each one unwavering, each one reliable, each one a sun in its own right, a ball of burning gas that was so far away that its light took years to reach her eyes. Each one was a world, a possibility, a universe of its own beyond anything she had ever contemplated in her small cat mind. The light from these distant stars had traveled for years, for decades, for centuries, sometimes for thousands of years, journeying across the incomprehensible vastness of space, traveling through the vacuum of the cosmos, to arrive at this very moment, to illuminate this particular night, to become part of her vision of the world, to touch her small grey kitten eyes and transform her understanding forever. The carpet floated in the profound silence above the clouds, and Mina found herself breathing slowly, deeply, found her breath synchronizing with some deeper rhythm she could feel but not quite name. She was moved by the grandeur and the beauty and the overwhelming sense of scale that the stars inspired. The majesty of it all seemed to expand her chest, to make it hard to breathe, to fill her with a kind of exquisite ache that was part joy and part something deeper, something more fundamental than joy. She was so small, she realized with absolute clarity. Her city, which had seemed so vast and complex and full of infinite possibilities when she was walking its streets, was really just a small point on a small planet in a vast universe full of incomprehensible wonders. She was infinitesimally small. Her problems, her worries, her individual existence seemed to shrink in the face of this cosmic perspective. But rather than making her feel insignificant or diminished, this realization brought her a strange kind of peace, a kind of comfort that she had not anticipated. If she was so small, then her worries and her fears were also small, were manageable, were put into a different perspective. If the universe was so vast, so incomprehensibly large, then there was room in it for her small life, for her small discoveries, for her small moments of wonder and joy. She mattered, even if only as a tiny speck. She was connected to all of this, was part of all of this, was woven into the fabric of this vast and beautiful cosmos. She was part of something larger, something grander, something that extended far beyond her ability to fully comprehend. And that knowledge, rather than crushing her, elevated her, made her feel that her existence, however small, was meaningful, was significant, was part of something magnificent. The magic of the carpet seemed to respond to her understanding, seemed to shift in response to her realization, seemed to hold her gently in this moment, allowing her to rest in the presence of the stars, to feel the weight of their ancient light, to truly understand that she was connected to them and they to her, all of them bound together in this vast web of existence, all of them part of the same universe, all of them part of the same story. Time seemed to have stopped, seemed to have become irrelevant, seemed to have lost its normal force and meaning. There was no past, no future, no progression, only this moment, only this eternal now, only this place floating above the clouds, only the stars and the clouds and the purple carpet and Mina, floating together in the darkness, suspended in space and time, held by magic. She could see the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light, exactly like the lantern-lit river she had seen from a lower vantage point, except that this river of light was infinitely larger, infinitely more distant, infinitely more ancient. This was light from stars that had been burning for millennia, before humans even invented the lanterns that lined the river below. The patterns in the stars seemed to tell stories, seemed to write narratives across the sky, seemed to whisper secrets about the nature of the universe and her place within it, about the meaning of existence and the significance of small moments and small lives. She found herself thinking about all the other creatures who had ever looked up at these stars, about all the humans in her city who had ever paused in their busy lives to glance upward and catch a glimpse of this celestial beauty, about all the animals who had ever walked beneath this sky and felt the touch of this ancient light. They were all connected, she realized with sudden certainty, all part of the same vast human and animal family, looking up at the same stars, feeling the same sense of awe and wonder, experiencing the same profound humility in the face of cosmic grandeur. The carpet began to shift, began to change direction, began to prepare for the descent. The magic seemed to pulse with a different rhythm now, seemed to be saying that it was time to move on, time to experience the next part of the journey, time to bring what she had learned at this cosmic height back down to the more grounded reality of the city. Mina felt a pang of reluctance. a deep desire to remain here in this moment of cosmic awareness, to stay floating above the clouds forever with the stars burning above her, to never descend back into the limitation and ordinariness of the terrestrial world. But the magic was gentle, was infinitely patient, was utterly reassuring in its presence. It seemed to whisper to her, to speak in a language that bypassed words and spoke directly to her understanding. It seemed to say that there was more to come, that the greatest gift of the night was yet to be revealed, that there was something waiting for her below that was just as important and just as beautiful as what she had experienced here among the stars. And so she let go of her reluctance, let go of her desire to linger, and allowed the magic to carry her downward once more. As the carpet began to descend, began to move backward through the space it had ascended, passing back down through the clouds, Mina found that the clouds no longer felt like barriers, no longer felt like obstacles, or obstacles separating her from something she wanted to reach. They felt like transitions, like the soft threshold between one world and another, like the boundary between dream and waking, like a gentle passageway designed to ease her from one state of being to another. The clouds parted around her like curtains in a theatre, like the heavy drapes that might open on a stage, revealing glimpses of the city below. But the city below was transformed, was different than it had been when she had risen above it. The lights that had been clear and distinct from her earlier vantage points, the lights that had marked individual neighborhoods and streets and buildings, now appeared softer, more diffuse, more dreamlike, more like memories of a place than like the actual physical place itself. The descent was noticeably slower than the ascent had been, slower and more deliberate, as if the magic understood that she needed time to adjust, time to come back down gradually from the transcendent experience of the stars and the cosmic perspective she had gained. The air warmed as she fell, warmed incrementally as they descended through the different layers of atmosphere, the freshness of the upper atmosphere giving way to the warmer, more humid air of the city below. She could smell the differences in the air, could sense the change as they moved from the cool purity of high altitude back toward the complex mixture of scents that characterized the urban environment. The magic of the carpet continued to pulse beneath her, steady and sure and unwavering, continued to guide her downward toward whatever destination had been planned for her all along, toward the final stage of this extraordinary journey. She had already seen so much, had experienced so much, had been changed in so many ways by the magic and the journey and the visions of her city revealed from above. But the magic had already told her, through the gentle whisper of its presence, that there was still more to come. Through the thinning clouds, she began to make out shapes again. The rooftops became visible once more, but not the rooftops with their bright gardens. Instead, she could see quieter places, darker areas, spaces that seemed removed from the main body of the city. They were moving away from the densely populated neighborhoods, moving towards something more remote, more hidden, more secret. The magic seemed to know exactly where it was going, seemed to have a destination in mind. The stars above were still visible, still burning with their steady light, but they were becoming obscured once more by the clouds and the atmosphere and the light of the city. Mina found herself committing them to memory, trying to hold on to the feeling of that moment when the universe had revealed itself to her, when she had felt so small and yet so connected, so insignificant and yet so valued. The carpet descended lower, lower still, bringing her down below the level of even the tallest buildings, down toward the streets where people walked and lived and worked during the day. But it was night now, and the streets were quiet, were almost empty, were transformed into something different from what they were in daylight. The sidewalks gleamed with the moisture of the night air, the streetlights cast long shadows, and everything had a dreamlike quality. She could see lights coming on in scattered windows, hints of people waking up perhaps, or people still awake in the deep hours of the night. The world below was never truly asleep, she realized. There was always someone awake, always, Someone working, always someone living out their life in the darkness. The city was like a vast organism, and the night was simply a different rhythm to its constant heartbeat. The carpet continued to descend, and Mina began to recognize landmarks, began to see streets that were familiar, began to understand that they were approaching something known. They were getting close to the neighborhood where she lived, close to the familiar streets and alleyways that formed the center of her small cat world. But the magic did not take her directly home. Instead, it seemed to be guiding her towards something specific, some particular place that had been waiting for her discovery. The carpet glided between buildings, following a path that wound through the quieter residential streets, moving away from the main thoroughfares and into the hidden places, the spaces between buildings, the small parks and gardens that she had occasionally discovered in her wanderings. And then, appearing before her like something that had been waiting to be found, she saw it. A garden. Not a rooftop garden like the ones she had seen earlier. This was a ground-level garden, a hidden sanctuary tucked away between buildings, a space that seemed to exist outside of the normal flow of the city. The magic of the carpet seemed to recognize this place, seemed to be intensely drawn to it, seemed to understand that this was exactly where it was meant to bring her. The descent slowed even more, slowed to almost a floating speed, became almost a gentle settling, as if the magic was being extremely careful not to disturb anything, not to break any spell, not to introduce any jarring element into this sacred space. Mina could see the garden more clearly now as they descended, could begin to make out its features in the darkness. It was overgrown in the most beautiful way, full of plants that had been allowed to grow wild, to spread where they wished, to create their own patterns and designs without human interference. There were flowers, though she could not make out which varieties in the darkness, though she could sense their presence through scent and the sense of their blooms turning skyward. There were shrubs and small trees that had grown tall over the years, and the whole space seemed to be enclosed by higher walls on all sides, creating a sanctuary, a hidden world within the larger world of the city, a place apart. The carpet descended further, bringing her down toward the ground level, toward the garden itself, toward the final destination of this long journey through the night sky above her city. She could smell it now, could smell the garden before she could see it clearly, the rich and loamy earth smell of growing things, the sweetness of flowers in various stages of bloom, flowers with names she did not know, but whose beauty was evident even in the darkness, the green freshness of leaves and stems and roots buried deep beneath the soil. The air was warm here, was noticeably warmer than it had been even just moments before, protected from the wind and the cold of the upper atmosphere by the enclosing walls on all sides, and it carried with it the sense of a place that was deeply loved by someone, that was carefully tended with intention and care, that was genuinely cherished by whoever had created and maintained it. This was a place where someone had invested time and energy and love, had chosen to create beauty even in a hidden corner of the city where few would ever see it. The carpet lowered her gently, so impossibly gently that she could barely feel the moment when it touched down, when it set itself to rest on the soft earth of the garden. It was as if the magic was so careful, so conscientious, that it wanted to make the landing as imperceptible as possible, wanted to ease her into this new reality without any jarring or sudden changes. Mina remained curled upon the carpet for a long moment, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had brought her to this place and kept her safe throughout this long and extraordinary night of wonders. But gradually, as the magic continued to pulse beneath her in its steady, reassuring rhythm, she found herself relaxing, found herself releasing the tension she had been holding in her small body, found herself understanding that this was a safe place, that this was exactly where she was meant to be, that this was home in a way that transcended geography and addresses. She stood slowly, carefully, her legs stiff from the long journey through the sky, but her spirit lighter than it had ever been, buoyant with the weight of everything she had seen and learned. The garden around her was filled with shadows and subtle shapes that her cat eyes could barely make out in the darkness. But it was not frightening, was not hostile, was not anything that threatened her. It was peaceful, was welcoming, was exactly the kind of place that a small kitten might find to rest, to recover, to integrate the extraordinary experiences of the night, to allow her body and spirit to find equilibrium after the intense journey. There was a soft spot in the garden, a place where plants grew thickly and densely, creating a cozy nest of growing things, where the earth was cushioned by years of fallen leaves and organic matter, where the ground itself was warm and welcoming. Mina made her way toward it slowly, stepping carefully on the soft ground, moving quietly past flowers that released their fragrance as she brushed against them in passing, past shrubs and small bushes that whispered their gentle greetings in response to her movement. The magic of the carpet seemed to be leading her still, even as its form was fading, even as it was beginning to disappear, guiding her toward this specific spot, toward this particular place of rest that had been waiting for her. As she settled herself into the soft earth, curling her body into a comfortable tight ball, making herself into a small and compact shape, surrounding herself with the warmth and the softness and the gentle rustling of the growing things all around her. She felt something profound happening within her. The journey was ending. The adventure was concluding. The magic was releasing her from its embrace, was allowing her to rest, was preparing her for the return to the ordinary world and the ordinary rhythms of her small cat life in the city streets below. But she knew, even as the journey ended, that she was not the same cat who had set out on this adventure. She had been fundamentally transformed by what she had seen and experienced, had been changed at the deepest levels of her understanding and her soul. She had learned the breadth and depth of her city, had understood the complexity and the multifaceted beauty of the place where she lived, had seen how all the pieces fit together to create something larger and more meaningful than any single part. She had seen stars that had burned for eons, ancient suns that had been shining for longer than human civilization had existed, had floated above clouds and rivers and gardens and neighborhoods, had experienced a kind of wonder and transcendence that went beyond anything she could have imagined during her small and ordinary cat life on the streets. The garden seemed to embrace her, seemed to rock her gently, seemed to sing to her with the rustling of leaves and the soft chirps of night creatures. She could hear the distant sound of the clock tower bell, marking the hours of the night, a reminder that time continued to move forward, even as she rested here in this moment of profound peace. Her eyes grew heavier with each passing moment. The journey that had started with such excitement and curiosity, that had taken her through neighborhoods and over rivers, that had brought her to the heights above the clouds to see the stars, was drawing to a close. But the closing was not an ending, she understood with sudden clarity. It was a transformation. It was a metamorphosis. It was a moment of integration, where all that she had learned and seen and felt would become part of her, would shape who she was, and how she understood the world would become woven into the very fabric of her being. Sleep was coming, and she welcomed it with her whole heart. Sleep was the natural completion of this extraordinary night, the soft return to the ancient rhythms of the body, the gentle fading of consciousness into the realm of dreams. And in those dreams, she would continue to see the stars, would continue to travel the streets of her city with her new understanding, would continue to hold within herself the deep understanding that she was part of something vast and beautiful and utterly interconnected. The carpet beneath her began to fade, began to lose its distinct and separate form, began to seem more like the earth itself, more like a natural part of the garden, more like it had always been there. The magic continued to pulse, continued to beat like a second heartbeat. But it was gentler now, was softer, was more like the steady breathing of the earth itself, the slow and patient pulse of roots growing deep into the soil far below her, the quiet and invisible circulation of nutrients and water through the plants that surrounded her in the darkness. Mina's breathing slowed, became deeper, became fuller, became more synchronized with the breathing of the garden around her, with the breathing of the city far below, with the breathing of the vast universe that stretched above her, beyond the clouds, beyond the atmosphere, into the infinite expanse of stars that were even now burning their ancient light. Her small pores relaxed, released their tension, released all the muscles that had been held tight throughout the journey, sank deeper into the soft and welcoming earth. Her ears, which had been alert and sensitive throughout the entire journey, drooped gently, no longer needing to monitor the sounds around her, no longer requiring vigilance, because she was home now, was truly safe now, was exactly where she needed to be. The night continued around her, continued its ancient rhythms, continued its slow progression toward dawn, but she was no longer fully part of it. She was falling now, falling gently and slowly toward sleep, toward dreams, toward the deep and profound restoration of her body and her spirit. The garden held her, cradled her, supported her, and the carpet beneath her had become indistinguishable from the earth itself, had become part of the natural world, had returned to its original form. And the magic that had carried her through this extraordinary night was now settling into a different form, was transforming itself, was becoming the dream magic that would fill her sleep, that would populate her dreams with visions of the city below and the stars above, that would transform her inner world. Just as the journey had so profoundly transformed her outer world. Time seemed to stop, seemed to lose its normal meaning, seemed to become something different and more flexible. There was no sound except the gentle rustling of leaves in the night breeze, the soft whisper of wind moving through the plants, the distant and mournful bell of the clock tower somewhere in the city, marking the deep hours of the night, marking the passage of time for all those still awake and aware. Mina's consciousness was fading, was drifting away from the sensory world, was moving slowly and peacefully toward the realm of sleep and dreams, and the profound restoration that came with complete and unguarded rest. The city continued to breathe around her, continued its ancient cycle of night and approaching dawn, continued the endless rhythms of life and activity that never truly stopped, that never truly slept. The rooftop gardens continued to glow softly in the darkness, those hidden places of cultivation and beauty that existed above the streets, that represented humanity's desire to grow things even in the heart of the urban environment. The lantern-lit river continued to flow with its steady current, continued its patient journey through the neighborhoods, carrying the light along its course, reflecting the human commitment to honoring natural beauty. The stars continued to burn above the clouds, continued their ancient and indifferent burning, unconcerned with the small kitten who had briefly journeyed into their realm, unaware of the profound impact they had had on her understanding of the world. And in a quiet garden tucked away between buildings, in a hidden sanctuary known only to a few, a small grey kitten slept the sleep of one who had been fundamentally changed, who had been enlarged by wonder, who had discovered that her world was both smaller and larger than she had ever imagined, more intimate and more vast, more personal and more cosmic. The magic continued to hold her, even in sleep, continued to surround her, continued to protect her from the uncertain night, comforting her, reminding her that she was valued, that she was part of something beautiful and interconnected, that her small life mattered in the vast tapestry of the city and the universe, that nothing was truly small or insignificant when viewed from the proper perspective. And as the night deepened and the dawn began to approach, began to paint the sky with the first hints of colour, she rested, peaceful and safe and cherished. The extraordinary journey of the magical carpet, becoming the foundation for all the days and nights to come, becoming the lens through which she would view her world, becoming the understanding that would carry her forward into whatever future awaited her.